11:14. So this is kind of a continuation of the previous one. We're giving an array list of words called word list, and then we need to return an array list. We'll modify that array list. Actually, we don't need to return it because we can just modify it directly in the scramble remove thing, where if we put in a word that doesn't get scrambled, for example, in this one, whoa or eggs won't get scrambled because there's no A in any spot other than the last one. We should remove those words. So this actually seems really straightforward, and it is mostly straightforward, but there's going to be a minor twist in here. So we can use the method we already built to basically just figure out, okay, we put a word into the scramble thing, into the word scramble. What was the name of that previous? The name of this previous one was what called scramble word. Okay, very creative. We put a word in there. If the word that comes out is the same as the word that we put in, then we'll know. Then we'll have to trigger something and remove it. Otherwise, we will replace it. So the issue here is going to be in running through the array list. So for example, we run through this array list. Okay, hopefully it's not too big of a deal to kind of check this one to see if it's scrambled. Okay, if it is scrambled, we'll replace it. But the question here comes to like what's going to happen when we go to whoa. So we're at first at index 0. We find, hey, index 0, yes, the output word is different from the input word. Okay. We'll replace it. We get to index 1, we say, okay, output's different from the input, okay, we'll replace it. Now we get to index 2, and we say the output's the same as the input, let's remove it. Now if we use like a for loop, and this is kind of similar to the problem in part A, if we use a for loop, then we're going to check 3. But what's going to happen when we remove whoa, everything else is going to slide over 1. So apple will now be here, and eggs will now be here. So there's going to be 2 problems using a for loop, because now we'll check index 3, but we won't be looking at apple, we'll be looking at eggs, right? Because everything's shifted to the left. So there's a couple problems in here. One, we're skipping over apple entirely, so apple will not get scrambled like it should. We might run into some index issues because we'd be checking index. Eventually, we'd check index 4, but we'd find there's nothing there, so we get some sort of error there as well. So really, this is actually very similar to the previous problem, where a for loop will not work for you. You need to use a while loop in here to adjust your, to adjust your kind of index, the index that you're checking. All right, so let's just get directly into the code. That was our pseudocode section. Let's just get directly into the code. We'll start with an int count equal to 0. We are going to run while count is less than, what's the name of the thing that we get here? Word list dot size. So as long as it's, yeah. But we're just going to have to modify our count a little bit, same way we did in the previous thing here. So let's see, how can we do this? I think there's a lot of different ways we could do this. That thing's going to output. So we could do this a couple of different ways. We could make a temporary thing where we are going to store the output. You know what? I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do word list get, and then we'll put in count. So that's going to return a word from the word list. And then we want to say if this string is equals, or equals, I don't know, is equals, not grammatically great, word list. So if this word in the word list is equals, I can't stop myself, equals, let's do, what's the name of that thing with scramble word? You know, I think there's when I write this out, scramble word list dot get count. Ugh, that's a really long line of code. That's really not great. I would have liked to put maybe a temp in here. That works fine. That's a giant long set of code, but really it's just, we're pulling out a string from this section, pulling out a string from the word list and seeing if it equals that same string scrambled. Oh, and we want to throw an if in here. So if those two things are equal, then we want to remove it. Then word list dot remove the thing it counts. And so that's again where if we're working in here, we got to whoa, we want to remove it. And as a result, everything else is going to shift to the left. So in here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just not going to mess with count. If I was looking at index location 2 when I found whoa, I want to keep looking at index location 2 because now Apple will be there. So in this case, I'm just going to remove it, and I'm not going to mess with the index location or the count at all. And let's see, on the other hand, if wordlist.getCount equals, so if this is not true, if this scrambled word is different than the word that went in, then we want to say wordlist. Oh, I think we can use the command. We should do replace. Yeah, replace is probably the best way of doing that. And then we'll put in our index count. And then we want to put in scramble word, word list, dot get count. That should work. We're gonna replace whatever's in there in that location. I'm not exactly sure about the syntax. If you wrote something like this on the test, you'd be totally fine. I mean, this is pretty sure that's the right command, and I'm pretty sure this is the order for it. But if you wrote something slightly different, I wouldn't be too worried about it. And then in here, we want to do count plus plus. Because, for example, for any of these other ones, like when we get to tan, if it's different, okay, we replace it and we move on to abracadabra. And that's really the entire, and however, if it's the same, then we'll remove it. And in here, we're not adjusting the count at all to keep looking at the same location. So let's see here. Let's pop over to our answers. And let's see how we did. I feel like that's covering everything. Okay, so they're doing an index. They're not returning anything because we're just modifying the array list directly. Less than size. Yeah, so they did this, which, okay. This is like a nice organization for it. I mean, you saw how like crazy long some of my things got. It is super nice to have this kind of define a string, define a scrambled string. It makes your code a lot easier to read, both for me and probably for you to kind of you to think through it. For me, I wrote out a long one. I thought as I was writing it, like I definitely should be writing this shorter, but that's okay. But overall, they're doing the same exact thing. Oh, set, that was the command for that. They did put the index, and they used scrambled. They used the command set. I thought it was replace. I think if you use something like that, as long as I can know what your intentions are, I think I'll be okay. Even if you switch like index and scrambled, I can figure out what your intention is. But yeah, so overall that works like that. I think the biggest thing, it's kind of similar to part A, where messing with the index that you're using, using the count, like using a while loop and modifying what's going to happen, like how it's going to increment depending on what happens within the code. It's kind of the same thing in both of these. In this case, it's because we're using the remove, and in the previous one, it's because depending on whether we actually run a swap or not. Yeah. So okay, so overall, not too bad. Yeah, I think part B was probably easier than part A, although maybe it's just because I made part A so hard on myself.